Captain Jin Park stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiant, watching the stars through the main viewport. His ship was small compared to the massive battleships that protected Earth, but it was fast and tough. The Defiant had seen many battles in the past 3 years since the war with the Velthari Empire began. "Captain, we're getting new orders from Fleet Command," said Lieutenant Na Kim from her station. She was young, but had proven herself many times in combat. Her fingers moved quickly across the control panel as she read the incoming message. Jin walked over to her station. "What do they want us to do now?" Na Kim looked up at him with worried eyes. "We're being sent to the Outer Rim, sir. New Geneva system. Intelligence says there's a large Velthari fleet moving in that direction." Jin felt his stomach tighten. New Geneva was a colony world with nearly 2 million civilians. It was also one of the furthest human settlements from Earth, which meant help would be days away if the Velthari attacked. "How large is this fleet?" Jin asked. "The report says over 800 ships, sir. Maybe more." Na Kim's voice was quiet. Everyone on the bridge had heard her words, and Jin could feel the tension in the room grow thicker. 800 ships. Jin had never heard of a Velthari fleet that big. The largest one he had faced before had only 50 vessels, and that fight had nearly destroyed the Defiant. He tried not to think about what 800 enemy ships could do to his single destroyer. "What are our orders exactly?" Jin asked, though he had a feeling he already knew. "Reconnaissance only, sir. We're to observe and report fleet movements. Command specifically says we are not to engage the enemy." Na Kim handed him the datapad with the full orders. Jin read through the orders twice. The words were clear, but he knew how these things usually went. Once they were out there alone, things could change very quickly. The Velthari were not known for their mercy, especially when it came to human colonies. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Tae Yoon from the engineering station, "I've been monitoring our systems. Everything is running at peak efficiency. If we need to run fast, we can do it." Tae had been with Jin for 2 years now. He was the best engineer Jin had ever worked with, and more importantly, he understood what it meant to keep a ship alive when everything was trying to kill it. His calm voice helped ease some of the tension on the bridge. "Good to know, Tae. How long until we reach the jump point?" Jin asked. 30 minutes, sir," replied the navigation officer. Jin looked around at his crew. There were only 43 people on the Defiant, and he knew each one by name. They had all volunteered for this mission, even though they knew it was dangerous. Some of them had families back on Earth or the inner colonies. Others, like Jin himself, had lost everything to the Velthari already. The war had started 3 years ago when the Velthari Empire had demanded that humans surrender their outer colonies. They claimed that humans were expanding too fast and taking resources that belonged to other species. When humanity refused, the Velthari attacked. The first battles had gone badly for the humans. Velthari technology was more advanced in many ways. Their ships were bigger, their weapons more powerful, and their shields stronger. But humans had learned to fight differently. They used speed instead of power, surprise instead of strength. Jin had been a lieutenant when the war started. He had served on the battleship Yorktown during the disaster at Kepler Station. He watched 7 human ships get destroyed by a Velthari force half their size, but he had also seen what happened when humans fought smart instead of just fighting hard. "Captain," Na Kim said, bringing Jin back to the present, "I'm getting reports from other scout ships in the area. They're all reporting the same thing. Velthari ships moving toward New Geneva. Lots of them. Any word on what type of ships?" Jin asked. "Mix of everything, sir. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, even some of their carrier ships." Na Kim paused. "Sir, there are also reports of troop transports." Jin felt cold. Troop transports meant the Velthari weren't just planning to destroy New Geneva. They wanted to take it. That was worse than a simple attack. It meant they planned to capture the civilians and use them as slaves or worse. "Attention all hands," Jin said, pressing the ship-wide communication button. "This is the captain. We're heading into a dangerous situation. Our job is to watch and report, but I want everyone ready for anything. Check your equipment, review your emergency procedures, and remember your training. We've been through tough times before, and we've always made it home. Today will be no different." He turned off the communication and looked at Na Kim. "Send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we're proceeding to the target area as ordered. Also tell them that based on the reports we're getting, this looks like a full invasion force, not just a raiding party." "Yes, sir," Na Kim replied. As the Defiant moved toward the jump point, Jin thought about the 800 Velthari ships waiting for them. He had read every report about Velthari tactics and technology. He knew their standard formations and their preferred attack patterns, but this was different. This was the largest fleet the Velthari had ever assembled. The question that worried him most was simple. Why did they need so many ships to attack one human colony? New Geneva had some defensive platforms and maybe 20 patrol boats, but nothing that could threaten a fleet of this size. Unless the Velthari knew something that human command didn't. Jump point in 5 minutes. Captain, called out the navigation officer. Jin took a deep breath and prepared himself for whatever was waiting for them in the New Geneva system. He had a feeling that this reconnaissance mission was going to be anything but routine. The Defiant dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Geneva system with a flash of blue light. Captain Jin Park immediately felt the familiar sensation of his stomach settling as the ship's artificial gravity systems adjusted to normal space. "All systems normal, Captain," reported Lieutenant Tae-yoon from his engineering station. "Jump drive is cooling down and will be ready for emergency jump in 15 minutes. Good. Nakim, start scanning for the Velthari fleet. Passive sensors only. I don't want them to know we're here until we know where they are," Jin ordered. Lieutenant Na Kim's fingers danced across her control panel. The main screen filled with data as the ship's sensors began mapping the system. For a few moments, everything seemed normal. The gas giant New Geneva orbited was exactly where it should be, along with its 3 moons where the human colonies were built. Then Na Kim's face went pale. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures near the 2nd moon. It's the Velthari fleet, sir. And it's even bigger than we thought." "How many ships?" Jin asked, moving to stand behind her station. "I count 847 vessels, sir. They're in a standard battle formation, about 6 hours away from the colonies." Na Kim's voice was steady, but Jin could hear the worry underneath. Jin studied the tactical display. The Velthari fleet was enormous, filling space like a dark cloud. Their ships were arranged in perfect geometric patterns that showed their military discipline. At the center were the massive battleships, surrounded by layers of cruisers and destroyers. Fighter carriers hung at the edges like hunting birds waiting to strike. "Sir," called out the communications officer, Lieutenant Yu Lee. "I'm picking up Velthari communications. They're using standard military encryption, but some of it is in the clear. It sounds like they're preparing for a major assault." Meanwhile, on the Velthari command ship Eternal Conquest, sensor operator Hai Wan stared at her displays in confusion. She was young for her position, only recently graduated from the Imperial Naval Academy. This was her first major campaign and she wanted to do everything perfectly. "Sub-Admiral Morkesh," she called out to the command deck. "I'm detecting an energy signature at the edge of the system. It appears to be a ship that just dropped out of hyperspace." Sub-Admiral Morkesh walked over to her station. He was an experienced officer who had served in the Imperial Navy for 20 years. Unlike Fleet Admiral Kekstar, who commanded the entire fleet, Morkesh was more careful and thoughtful. "What type of signature?" Morkesh asked. "Sir, the energy pattern matches human hyperspace technology," Hai Wan replied. The bridge of the Eternal Conquest became very quiet. All around them, officers stopped their work to listen. Human ships had not been detected in this sector for months. Most of the Velthari believed that human forces were too weak and too few to threaten such a large fleet. "Are you certain it's a human vessel?" Morkesh asked. Hai Wan checked her readings again. "Yes, sir. The hyperspace exit signature is definitely human design. Size indicates it's probably a destroyer-class ship." Morkesh felt a cold feeling in his stomach. He had fought against human ships before, during the Battle of Arcturus. That had been 2 years ago, and he still had nightmares about it. The Velthari had won that battle, but the cost had been terrible. 3 Velthari ships destroyed for every human ship, and the humans had fought until their ships were nothing but burning metal. "Contact Fleet Admiral Kekstar immediately," Morkesh ordered. "Tell him we have detected a human warship in the system." On the bridge of the fleet flagship Cosmic Dominion, Fleet Admiral Kekstar received the news with laughter. He was a large Velthari with dark blue skin and the traditional war markings of his clan. He had been chosen to lead this fleet because of his aggressive tactics and his hatred of humans. "One ship?" Kekstar asked his communications officer. One human ship against 847 Velthari vessels? Are they planning to surrender? Sir, Sub-Admiral Morkesh requests permission to deploy fighter squadrons to investigate, the communications officer replied. Denied, Kekstar said, waving his hand dismissively. Let them watch. Let them see the power of the Velthari Empire. When they report back to their leaders, they will tell them that resistance is hopeless. But across the fleet, the news spread quickly through the communication networks. Ship captains who had never fought humans before began asking questions. Those who had fought them before became very quiet. Captain Veltar of the cruiser Stormbringer called his senior officers to the bridge. I want all weapon systems checked immediately, he ordered. Double the number of sensor operators on duty. Sir, it's just one ship, his first officer pointed out. You've never fought humans before, Veltar replied. I have. During the siege of Centauri Station, I watched a single human destroyer disable 3 of our ships before we could stop it. The humans don't fight like any other species. They don't care about odds or logic. They fight like cornered animals. Similar conversations were happening on ships throughout the fleet. Officers who had experience with human tactics began sharing their stories. They talked about human ships that kept fighting even when they were heavily damaged. They described human crews who would ram their ships into Velthari vessels rather than surrender. On the Defiant, Captain Jin Park watched the Velthari fleet through his ship's sensors. He could see that they had detected his presence, but so far they were not moving to intercept him. That was good. It meant they thought he was not a threat. Captain, Nakim said, I'm picking up increased communication traffic throughout their fleet. It looks like they're talking about us. What kind of communications? Jin asked. Mostly ship-to-ship channels, some emergency frequencies. It's like they're asking each other questions about something, Nakim replied. Jin smiled slightly. This was interesting. The Velthari were supposed to be disciplined and organized. Fleet communication should be limited to official channels during a military operation. The fact that ships were talking to each other on unofficial channels suggested that something was making them nervous. Yuli, are you picking up any of their actual conversations? Jin asked. Some of it, sir. My Velthari is not perfect, but I keep hearing the word human repeated a lot. And something that sounds like danger or warning, Yuli replied. Sir, Tae-Yoon called out from his station. All our systems are running perfectly. If we need to leave quickly, we can jump out of here in 8 minutes. Jin nodded. 8 minutes was not very long if the Velthari decided to attack, but it would have to be enough. He was starting to realize that his mission might be more important than he had thought. The Velthari fleet was acting strange, and that could be valuable information for human command. Keep monitoring their communications, Jin ordered, and keep our engines ready for emergency jump. I have a feeling this is going to get interesting very quickly. The news of the human ship spread through the Velthari fleet like fire through dry grass. On the destroyer Knight's edge, Captain Bo Choi stood in his quarters staring at the message on his personal communication device. His hands were shaking slightly as he read the words again. Human destroyer detected in system. All ships maintain formation and continue mission preparation. Bo Choi had been hoping he would never see those words again. 2 years ago, he had been the maintenance chief on the battleship Iron Thunder during the Battle of Wolf 359. He was one of only 53 survivors out of a crew of 800. The human ships had hit them with something the Velthari had never seen before. Weapons that seemed to ignore their shields and tear through their armor like paper. He pressed the communication button on his desk. This is Captain Choi. I want to speak with all department heads immediately. Within minutes, his senior officers had gathered in the briefing room. Bo looked at their faces and saw the same confidence that he used to feel. They had not fought humans before. They thought this would be easy. I know what you're all thinking, Bo began. One human ship against our entire fleet seems like no threat at all. But I need to tell you something about humans and how they fight. He activated the main display and showed them pictures from Wolf 359. Twisted metal that had once been Velthari ships. Debris fields that stretched for thousands of kilometers. The faces of his officers became more serious as they looked at the images. This is what's left of the Iron Thunder, Bo said, pointing to a piece of wreckage that was barely recognizable as part of a ship. The humans did this with 3 ships against our force of 30. They didn't win because they had better technology. They won because they think differently than we do. Meanwhile, on the cargo ship Supply Line 7, a group of Velthari workers were having their own discussion. One of them, a young technician named Wu Kang, had just received a message from his cousin who served on a warship. "They say there's a human ship watching us," Wu said to his friends during their break period. "So what?" replied another worker. "It's just one ship. We have hundreds." But the oldest worker in the group, a veteran named Min Song, shook his head slowly. "I've heard stories about human ships. Bad stories. My brother served on the Victorious during the Rigel campaign. He said the humans have something they call berserker protocols." "What's that?" Wu asked. "When a human ship is about to be destroyed, they activate special systems that make their ship fight even after the crew is dead. My brother said he watched a human destroyer continue attacking for 20 minutes after it should have been destroyed. It rammed 2 of our ships before it finally exploded." The group became quiet. Stories like this had been spreading through the fleet for the past hour. Some were true, some were exaggerated, and some were completely false. But all of them made the Velthari crews more nervous. On the human ship Defiant, Captain Jin Park was watching the enemy fleet through his sensors with growing interest. What he saw surprised him. Instead of maintaining their perfect military formation, some of the Velthari ships were starting to move in small, uncoordinated ways. "Nakim, are you seeing this?" Jin asked. "Yes, sir. Several ships in their outer formations have changed position without orders, and I'm detecting power fluctuations throughout their fleet. It looks like many ships are running additional scans and charging their weapon systems," Lieutenant Nakim replied. "That's strange. They should be maintaining communication silence and power discipline if they're preparing for an attack," Jin observed. Lieutenant Yu Li looked up from her communication station with an excited expression. "Captain, I'm intercepting more of their communications now. My Velthari is getting better and I think I understand what they're saying." "What are they talking about?" Jin asked. "Stories, sir. They're telling each other stories about fighting humans. One ship captain is describing something called the Prometheus incident. Another is talking about human ships that exploded instead of surrendering. And sir, I keep hearing the phrase never surrender repeated over and over." Jin felt a cold smile cross his face. He was beginning to understand what was happening. The Velthari fleet was not just dealing with his ship. They were dealing with every story, every rumor, and every nightmare they had heard about fighting humans. On the Velthari command ship, Sub-Admiral Morkesh was becoming more worried by the minute. He had been receiving reports from ship captains throughout the fleet, and none of them were good news. "Sir," his communication officer reported, "Captain Veltar is requesting permission to launch fighter patrols. Captain Zoresh wants to move his ship to a different position, and Captain Merlock is asking for additional weapon power allocations." "Why are they making these requests?" Morkesh asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Sir, they all mention the human ship in their requests. Many of the captains who have fought humans before are asking for what they call anti-human combat preparations." Morkesh walked to the main tactical display and studied the fleet formation. What should have been a perfect geometric arrangement was starting to look ragged around the edges. Ships were making small movements, supposedly for system checks or routine maintenance, but Morkesh knew the real reason. His captains were nervous. He opened a private communication channel to Fleet Admiral Kekstar. "Sir, I recommend we send a squadron to investigate the human ship. The fleet is becoming unsettled by its presence." Kekstar's voice came back immediately, sounding angry. "Absolutely not. I will not show weakness by treating one enemy ship as a threat. All ships will maintain their positions and continue mission preparation. Any captain who moves without orders will be court-martialed." But Kekstar's order only made things worse. Now the ship captains were receiving direct commands to ignore their instincts and their experience. Captain Veltar, who had fought at Centauri Station, paced his bridge like a caged animal. He knew what humans were capable of, and he knew that ignoring them was a mistake. On the supply ship Far Trader, a group of Velthari Marines were checking their equipment when their sergeant called them together. "Listen carefully," the sergeant said. "I've received word that there might be human forces in this system. I want everyone to review the combat manual sections on fighting human soldiers." One of the younger Marines raised his hand. "Sergeant, what makes human soldiers different from other enemies?" The sergeant's expression became grim. "Humans don't know when to quit. Other species surrender when they're outnumbered or when their situation becomes hopeless. Humans keep fighting until they're dead. During the ground battle on New Carthage, I watched a single human soldier hold off an entire squad of our troops for 3 hours. He was wounded, out of ammunition, and completely surrounded, but he kept fighting with rocks and metal bars until we finally stopped him. Back on the Defiant, Jin was starting to realize that his mission might be more successful than anyone had expected. The Velthari fleet was clearly becoming agitated by his presence, even though he had done nothing except exist in the same system. "Captain," Tae-Yoon called out, "I'm detecting some interesting energy patterns from their fleet. Several ships are running their engines at higher power levels than necessary. Some are charging weapon systems. A few are even starting to raise their shields." "They're getting ready to fight something," Jin said thoughtfully. "But what? We're one ship against 800. There's no logical reason for them to be this worried. Unless," Nakim said slowly, "they're not worried about what we are. They're worried about what we might do." Jin looked at her with interest. "Explain that." "Sir, what if they've heard stories about human tactics? What if they think we're going to do something unpredictable or desperate? From their perspective, a single human ship appearing in their system doesn't make tactical sense unless we have some kind of secret weapon or suicide mission." Jin felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. The Velthari were disciplined, logical, and methodical in their military thinking. They planned their battles carefully and followed established procedures. But humans had a reputation for doing things that didn't follow any logical pattern. "Yuli," Jin said, "send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we're observing unusual behavior in the enemy fleet. They appear to be responding to our presence with more concern than the tactical situation warrants." As the message was sent, Jin watched the Velthari fleet continue to show signs of growing nervousness. He was beginning to wonder just how much damage one human ship could do without firing a single shot. The breaking point came when Captain Veltar of the Stormbringer made his decision. He had been watching his sensors for 2 hours, tracking the human ship that sat motionless at the edge of the system. Every instinct he had developed during 20 years of military service was screaming at him that something was wrong. "Helm, move us to position 77 Alpha," he ordered. "Sir, that's outside our assigned formation," his first officer pointed out. "I know exactly where it is," Veltar snapped. "Move us there now." The Stormbringer began to slowly change position. It was a small movement, just a few thousand kilometers, but in a fleet formation that precise, it might as well have been a shout of alarm. On the Eternal Conquest, sensor operator Haiwan immediately noticed the movement. "Sub-Admiral Morkesh, the Stormbringer is moving out of formation." Morkesh rushed to the tactical display. "Contact Captain Veltar immediately. Ask him why he's breaking formation." But before the communication could be sent, 3 more ships began moving. The destroyer Quick Strike shifted to a higher orbit. The cruiser Deep Current moved away from the main fleet. The supply ship Endless Journey started backing away from the formation entirely. "Sir," Haiwan called out, her voice rising with stress, "multiple ships are now moving without orders." Sub-Admiral Morkesh opened an emergency communication channel to all ships. "This is Sub-Admiral Morkesh. All ships return to assigned positions immediately. No ship movements are authorized at this time." But his order had the opposite effect. Instead of calming the fleet, it told every ship captain that other ships were moving without permission. That meant other captains were worried enough to risk court-martial. If experienced officers were breaking formation, maybe there was a good reason. On the destroyer Night's Edge, Captain Bo Choi made his own decision. "All hands to battle stations. Raise shields and charge weapon systems." His bridge crew looked at him in surprise. "Sir, we haven't received any combat orders," his tactical officer said. "I don't care what orders we've received," Bo replied. "I've fought humans before. When they show up unexpectedly, bad things happen. I'm not going to be caught unprepared again." The Night's Edge wasn't the only ship making that choice. Throughout the fleet, captains who had previous experience with human forces were taking defensive actions. Ships began raising shields, charging weapons, and moving to what they considered safer positions. On the Defiant, Lieutenant Na Kim watched the enemy fleet with amazement. "Captain, you need to see this. The Velthari formation is falling apart." Captain Jin Park studied the tactical display. What had been a perfect military formation was now becoming a scattered mess. Ships were moving in all directions, some backing away from the main fleet, others clustering together in defensive groups. "How many ships are out of position now?" Jin asked. Over 200, sir. And the number is growing every minute, Nakim replied. Lieutenant Yu Li looked up from her communication station with excitement. Captain, I'm intercepting emergency communications throughout their fleet. Ship captains are asking for permission to engage us. Others are reporting sensor contacts that aren't there. And sir, I just heard something about human attack patterns. Jin realized he was watching something incredible. The Velthari fleet was destroying its own organization, simply because they were afraid of what his ship might do. But he also knew that fear could quickly turn into aggression. If the Velthari decided to attack, his single ship would be destroyed in minutes. That's when Jin had an idea that would either end the war or get his crew killed. Yu Li, open a communication channel to the entire Velthari fleet, he ordered. His bridge crew stared at him in shock. Sir, Na Kim said carefully, that would reveal our exact position and capabilities to the enemy. I know, Jin replied, but I think it's time to show them what they're really afraid of. Lieutenant Yu Li's hands moved across her controls. Channel open, sir. You're broadcasting to every ship in their fleet. Jin took a deep breath and pressed the communication button. His voice would now be heard by nearly 1 million Velthari military personnel. This is Captain Jin Park of the Human Colonial Navy. We know you're here. The effect was immediate and devastating. On the Velthari ships, that simple message caused panic that spread faster than their communication systems could handle. The human voice speaking calmly in perfect Velthari language was like a nightmare come to life. On the cargo ship Supply Line 7, the crew thought they were under attack. The young technician Wu Kang dove under his workstation when he heard the human voice. Around him, other workers began running toward the emergency stations. On the battleship Iron Fist, Captain Mordeal heard the transmission and immediately assumed it was some kind of psychological warfare attack. Emergency combat alert, he shouted. All weapons target the human ship. But the Iron Fist wasn't the only ship trying to target the Defiant. 17 other ships received similar orders from their captains. The problem was that they were all scattered around the system in different positions, and many of them ended up pointing their weapons at each other instead of at the human ship. The cruiser Deep Current, trying to get a clear shot at the Defiant, moved directly into the firing line of the battleship Cosmic Thunder. Both ships activated their targeting systems at the same time and locked onto each other by mistake. Weapons lock detected, shouted the tactical officer on the Deep Current. We're being targeted by a Velthari ship. That's impossible, replied the captain. Check your sensors. But before the sensors could be checked, the Deep Current's automatic defense systems activated. The ship fired a spread of missiles at what it thought was an enemy vessel. The Cosmic Thunder, seeing incoming missiles, returned fire immediately. Both ships were badly damaged before their captains realized they had been shooting at each other. Similar incidents were happening throughout the fleet. The destroyer. Quick Strike collided with the supply ship Far Trader when both ships tried to move to the same position at the same time. The battleship Stormlord accidentally rammed the cruiser Nightwalker while trying to get into firing position. On the Eternal Conquest, Sub-Admiral Morkesh watched his beautiful fleet formation turn into complete chaos. Ships were scattered across the system. Some were on fire, others were drifting helplessly with damaged engines. Sir, Hai Wan reported, her voice shaking. I count 18 ships with serious damage. 7 have lost main power. 3 are showing hull breaches. How many enemy ships have we destroyed? Morkesh asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. None, sir. The human ship is still in the same position where we first detected it. Fleet Admiral Kekstar's voice came over the emergency communication system, and for the first time since the battle began, he sounded uncertain. All ships cease fire immediately. Return to defensive positions. But his order came too late. The damage was already done. His perfect fleet was now a scattered collection of damaged ships, many of which were more worried about avoiding collisions with other Velthari vessels than fighting the single human destroyer. On the Defiant, Captain Jin Park and his crew watched in amazement as the enemy fleet tore itself apart. They had done nothing except announce their presence, and the result was beyond anything Jin could have imagined. Captain, Tai Yun called out from his engineering station. Our hyperspace drive is ready for immediate jump. Jin nodded. It was time to leave. They had gathered more intelligence than anyone could have hoped for. and staying longer would only risk their lives unnecessarily. Nakim, get me a complete sensor record of everything that just happened, Jin ordered. Fleet Command is going to want to see this. As the Defiant prepared to jump to hyperspace, Jin took one last look at the Velthari fleet. What had been a perfectly organized invasion force was now a confused mess of damaged ships. And all because they had been afraid of what one human ship might do. Helm, take us home, Jin said with a smile. The HSS Defiant jumped to hyperspace in a brilliant flash of blue light, leaving behind the most successful reconnaissance mission in human military history. As the ship traveled through the strange dimensions of hyperspace toward Earth, Captain Jin Park sat in his quarters writing the most important report of his career. Mission log, Captain Jin Park, HSS Defiant. We have completed our reconnaissance of the Velthari fleet in the New Geneva system. Enemy forces consisted of 847 vessels arranged for planetary assault. However, the mission results exceeded all expectations in ways that no one could have predicted. Jin paused in his writing and looked at the sensor data on his personal screen. Even now, hours after the events, he could barely believe what had happened. A single human destroyer had caused one of the largest military fleets in galactic history to destroy itself through fear and panic. On the bridge, Lieutenant Na Kim was compiling the final damage assessments they had observed before jumping to hyperspace. The numbers were staggering. Over 200 Velthari ships had suffered some kind of damage, ranging from minor hull breaches to complete engine failures. 18 ships were so badly damaged they would need months of repairs. 3 had been completely destroyed in collisions with other Velthari vessels. Yu Li, Na Kim called to the communications officer. How many casualties do you estimate? The Velthari suffered? Lieutenant Yu Li looked up from her analysis of the intercepted communications. Based on the emergency calls I monitored, I estimate at least 15,000 wounded and possibly 3,000 dead. And that's just from the accidents and friendly fire incidents. No combat casualties, because there was no actual combat. The irony was not lost on anyone aboard the Defiant. They had achieved a military victory without firing a single shot or taking any hostile action whatsoever. The Velthari had defeated themselves simply because they were afraid of what humans might do. Meanwhile, in the New Geneva system, the aftermath of the disaster was just beginning. Fleet Admiral Kekstar stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the tactical display that showed his scattered and damaged fleet. His perfect invasion had become a humiliating defeat, and the worst part was that it had been caused by a single enemy ship that had done nothing but exist. Sir, his communication officer reported nervously, we're receiving damage reports from all sectors of the fleet. The medical ships are requesting emergency supplies. And sir, we're also receiving requests from over 50 ship captains asking permission to withdraw from the system. Kekstar closed his eyes and tried to control his anger. 50 captains wanted to retreat from an enemy force that consisted of one destroyer that had already left the system. His reputation as a military leader was destroyed, but more importantly, his invasion fleet was no longer capable of attacking anything. Send a message to Imperial Command, Kekstar said quietly. Tell them that the New Geneva assault has been postponed indefinitely due to unexpected tactical complications. He couldn't bring himself to explain that the unexpected tactical complications had been caused entirely by his own fleet's reaction to seeing a human ship. On the battleship Iron Fist, Captain Mordial was dealing with his own problems. His ship had suffered serious damage when it collided with a supply vessel, and his crew was shaken by the experience of shooting at other Velthari ships. Captain, his first officer asked, what do we tell the crew about what happened here? Mordial thought carefully before answering. How could he explain that an entire fleet had panicked because of one enemy ship? How could he tell his soldiers that they had been defeated by their own fear? We tell them that humans are more dangerous than we previously understood, Mordial said finally, and we make sure this never happens again. But even as he said the words, Mordial knew that the opposite was likely to be true. The story of what happened at New Geneva would spread throughout the Velthari Empire. Every military officer would hear about the fleet that destroyed itself, rather than face a single human ship. Instead of reducing the fear of human forces, this incident would make it much worse. 2 weeks later, the Defiant arrived at Earth's orbital shipyards. Captain Jin Park was immediately summoned to a meeting with Admiral Ha Kim, the commander of the Human Defense Forces. The meeting took place in a secure conference room deep within the military headquarters station. "Captain Park," Admiral Ha Kim said as she reviewed Jin's report, "what you're describing here sounds impossible. Are you certain about these numbers?" "Yes, ma'am," Jin replied. "We have complete sensor recordings of the entire incident. I've also included translations of the Velthari communications we intercepted. Everything is documented." Admiral Kim studied the data for several minutes in silence. She was a veteran officer who had commanded ships during some of the worst battles of the war. She understood military tactics and the psychology of combat better than almost anyone in the human fleet. "Captain, do you understand what this means?" she asked finally. "I believe so, ma'am. It means that our reputation as unpredictable fighters has become a weapon in itself." "It's more than that," Admiral Kim said. "It means that the Velthari are more afraid of us than we realized, and fear can be more powerful than any gun or missile." She stood up and walked to the large window that showed Earth hanging in space below them. "Captain Park, I'm classifying your report at the highest security level. I'm also recommending you and your crew for the Distinguished Service Medal." "Thank you, ma'am. But may I ask why the classification is necessary?" Admiral Kim turned back to face him. "Because if this information becomes public, every human ship captain in the fleet will try to repeat what you did. But this kind of psychological warfare only works if the enemy doesn't expect it. If we use it too often, they'll learn to overcome their fear." "What do you want me to tell my crew, ma'am? Tell them they did excellent work on a dangerous reconnaissance mission. Tell them they gathered vital intelligence that will help win the war. But don't tell them that they just discovered humanity's greatest weapon, the enemy's fear of what we might do." Over the following months, the effects of the New Geneva incident spread throughout both sides of the war. Among the Velthari, stories about the Ghost Fleet disaster became legendary. No one was quite sure what had really happened, but everyone agreed that human forces had somehow caused an entire invasion fleet to destroy itself. The result was that Velthari commanders became much more cautious about engaging human forces. They began requiring larger fleets and more defensive preparations for any operation that might involve contact with human ships. Ironically, their increased caution made them less effective as an attacking force. On the human side, diplomatic attaché Yuncio began noticing changes in Velthari behavior during peace negotiations. The aliens who had once demanded complete human surrender were now much more interested in finding compromise solutions. They spoke about humans with a mixture of respect and wariness that had not been there before. "They're afraid of us," Yun reported to her superiors. "Not afraid of our weapons or our ships, but afraid of what we might do next. They think we're completely unpredictable, and perhaps that was humanity's greatest advantage. In a galaxy full of logical, methodical species who fought wars according to established rules and procedures, humans had gained a reputation for doing the impossible and the unexpected. They were seen as a species that would rather die fighting than accept defeat, and that would find ways to win even when victory seemed impossible. The war did not end immediately, but the balance of power had shifted. The Velthari Empire began, looking for ways to end the conflict without further humiliation. Human forces found that their mere presence was often enough to cause enemy fleets to withdraw or surrender without fighting. Captain Jin Park was promoted to admiral and given command of a new type of mission, psychological warfare operations. His job was to study how human reputation could be used as a weapon, and how to make the most of the fear that other species felt when facing human forces. But he never forgot the lesson he learned at New Geneva. Sometimes the most powerful weapon was not the one you fired, but the one the enemy imagined you might fire. And sometimes the greatest victory was achieved not by destroying your enemies, but by letting them destroy themselves through their own fear. Years later, when the war finally ended with a negotiated peace that favored humanity, historians would mark the incident at New Geneva as the turning point. It was the moment when a single human ship proved that reputation and psychology could be more powerful than any number of weapons. The legend of the ship that defeated a fleet without firing a shot became part of human military culture. It reminded Everyone that in a universe full of bigger, stronger, and more technologically advanced species, humanity's greatest weapon was often the enemy's fear of what humans might do next. And as long as that fear existed, humanity would never be conquered.